It all started with a letter. It was a plain white envelope, almost blending in with the junk mail, but the crisp logo of the Willow Creek Homeowners Association stamped on the corner made my stomach drop. I tore it open, and inside was a formal notice, a fine for $50. The reason stated was a violation of Rule 14B, decorative item placement. Apparently, my wife, in a moment of simple homemaking, had left a potted plant on our front porch steps. It was a humble terracotta pot filled with vibrant, blooming red geraniums. It wasn't blocking the sidewalk, it wasn't gaudy or offensive, it was just a flower. But according to the esteemed members of the HOA board, it was classified as unapproved decor. I have to admit, my first reaction was to laugh. $50 over a flower? It sounded like a punchline to a bad joke, but the HOA wasn't joking. At the very bottom of the notice, printed in a severe bold red ink, was a stark warning. Failure to pay will result in escalating fines and possible lien action. A lien. On my house. Over a flower pot. That's when the laughter died in my throat. I wasn't about to roll over and let them bully me. Armed with the fine notice, I marched into the monthly HOA meeting held in the community clubhouse. The room had that familiar, stale smell of lukewarm coffee and quiet resentment. The board president, a silver-haired woman named Marjorie Blake, greeted me with that perfectly polished, plastic smile that every HOA tyrant seems to have mastered. It's a smile that says, "I'm listening," but her eyes say, "You're wasting my time." "Mr. Daniels," she began, her voice smooth as silk, "rules are rules. That pot is a clear violation of our community's uniformity standards." She gestured vaguely, as if my single pot of geraniums was a threat to the entire neighborhood's aesthetic integrity. I held up the paper, the red ink seeming to pulse under the fluorescent lights. $50 for a flower, Marjorie? That's not just strict, it's ridiculous. Show me exactly where in the bylaws it says I can't put a simple plant on my own steps. I was firm but respectful. I just wanted to see the rule in black and white. For the first time, her smile faltered. A flicker of something, annoyance, uncertainty, crossed her face. She began shuffling through a stack of papers on the table in front of her, deliberately avoiding eye contact. After a moment of tense silence, she finally muttered, "It's in section... yes, section 12, subsection 3. It's all there." But when I got home that night, I pulled out my thick, binder-bound copy of the HOA bylaws, the one they give you when you close on the house and hope you never read. I flipped through the pages, past rules on fence heights and garbage can placement, all the way to section 12. I read it, then reread it. There was no subsection 3. In fact, section 12 was about pool maintenance. There was nothing about decorative items on porch steps anywhere in the document. She had just made it up. That night, I couldn't sleep. I just couldn't let it go. It wasn't about the $50 anymore. It was the principle. If they were willing to invent one rule and try to enforce it with a straight face, what else were they hiding? The next morning, fueled by coffee and a healthy dose of suspicion, I drove to the county records office and filed a formal request for copies of all amendments to the Willow Creek HOA bylaws filed since its inception. It's a public record, something most homeowners never bother to check. A week later, I was sitting at my dining room table with a formidable stack of documents. As I sifted through years of paperwork, a strange and disturbing pattern began to emerge. I found something buried deep within a pile of poorly photocopied pages. The official bylaws had indeed been amended 9 years ago, but there was no record that this change had ever been mailed out or communicated to the residents as required by law. Worse still, several new rules had been quietly slipped into these unverified amendments. Rules that gave the board sweeping powers to issue fines for things like porch swings, certain types of lawn decorations, and even having your Christmas lights up a day too late. And the real kicker? Every single one of these questionable amendments had been signed by Marjorie Blake and Marjorie Blake alone. There was no record of a board vote, no evidence of homeowner approval. This wasn't just a case of a shady HOA, this was straight up illegal. I started asking my neighbors, casually at first. My next-door neighbor, Alan, a quiet guy who mostly kept to himself, told me he'd once been fined $200 because his trash can was still visible from the street an hour after the garbage truck had come. Another family down the block, the Patels, got slapped with a staggering $500 fine for having more than one pumpkin on their porch during Halloween. They called it excessive seasonal display. When I asked them if they had ever seen these rules in the official bylaws, they all had the same defeated response. They'd just shrug and say, "Marjorie said it was official. What are we supposed to do? Fight her and risk a lien?" The pattern was crystal clear. For years, Marjorie had been fabricating rules, issuing fines based on her own whims, and intimidating residents into paying them. But the big question remained. Where was all that money going? My next step was to file a formal request to see the HOA's complete financial records, which, by state law, all homeowners are entitled to review. This is where Marjorie's confidence finally cracked. She stalled, she made excuses, she delayed for weeks. Finally, she outright refused, citing privacy concerns. That was her biggest mistake. Because while she could hide her own books, she couldn't hide the records filed with the county clerk's office. And that's when I found it, the smoking gun. Over the past decade, more than $180,000 in violation fees had been collected from the residents of Willow Creek. But when I cross-referenced that with the HOA's official expenditures, landscaping contracts, pool repairs, playground upgrades, the numbers didn't add up. Less than half of that money was accounted for. The rest? It had vanished straight into a private secondary bank account registered under one name, Marjorie Blake. I came to the next HOA meeting armed and ready. The room was packed. Word had spread like wildfire after I started asking questions around the neighborhood. Neighbors who had stayed silent for years, too afraid or too tired to fight, were now present, their faces a mixture of anger and hope. They wanted answers. When it was my turn to speak, I didn't waste time. I stood at the podium and laid out everything I had found, piece by piece. I presented the fake amendments. I listed the fabricated fines. And then I revealed the missing money, holding up copies of the bank statements from the county clerk. A collective gasp swept through the room. Marjorie's face, once a mask of smug authority, was now completely drained of color. She looked ghostly white under the harsh lighting. She tried to interrupt, to object, her voice shrill and panicked. But I held up the copies of the county records high for everyone to see. "This isn't my word against yours, Marjorie," I said, my voice ringing with clarity. "These are official documents. The numbers don't lie." Then a powerful thing happened. Alan, my quiet neighbor, stood up. Then Mrs. Patel stood up. Then another neighbor, and another, and another. For the first time, people weren't afraid anymore. A chorus of voices rose up, demanding her immediate resignation from the board. 2 weeks later, Marjorie Blake was gone. She was removed from the board in disgrace and was now facing a full-blown criminal investigation for embezzlement. The county authorities seized her personal accounts, and a court order for full restitution was issued. Every single homeowner who had been unjustly fined received a reimbursement check, with interest. My little $50 fine for a flower pot turned into a check for $312. But it was never about the money. It was about the simple, undeniable fact that one petty, completely absurd $50 fine had been the loose thread that unraveled a decade-long scam. Homeowners associations thrive on silence and apathy. They count on people being too busy, too tired, or too intimidated to ever fight back against their decrees. But sometimes, all it takes is one stubborn homeowner refusing to pay for a pot of flowers to bring the whole rotten, corrupt system crashing down. So the next time your HOA sends you a fine that just doesn't feel right, Don't just write the check to make it go away. Ask questions. Demand to see the rule in writing. Dig a little deeper. Because you never ever know what kind of secrets might be hiding behind a $50 violation.